itself, subject to interstate compacts and treaties. That is, the state itself owns the molecules of water, but are limited by any interstate agreements that they have with other states, which can reduce that quantity, or decrees, which are handed down by the Supreme Court that apportions the water between competing states. I think the more provocative question, though, and what probably has attracted many of you here, is the nature of what water rights are. I'm getting some. How's that? Better? I'm going to like this. Is that better? So the more provocative question, I think, is what is the nature of the water rights that each of you might hold? If you have a surface water right, that's a right issued by the state of Nebraska, you will receive a document. And that is a qualified right to use surface water. That's to divert it directly from a stream. And that piece of paper will specify how much water you can use, where you can use it, and your priority date, which determines your right vis-a-vis other users. If you own real estate in Nebraska, you also have a qualified right to access that underlying groundwater. But it's qualified by the rules and regulations of your local NRD. And each NRD is different. The water management needs of, say, Omaha are dramatically different than the water management needs of, say, the Scottsbluff area. So for that reason, the legislature empowered each NRD to adopt unique rules and regulations to meet their own water management needs. Now, I think Nebraskans have kind of a tendency to beat themselves up over water management, and we kind of have an inferiority complex at times. But I would direct your attention to the U.S. Geological Survey annual reports on the High Plains Aquifer. The High Plains Aquifer is the large 7-state aquifer that includes the Ogallala Aquifer. And every other year or so, the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, does a report which tells you the health of that aquifer. And they just issued their most recent report in June of this year, which looked at declines in that aquifer for pre-development through 2015. And that report indicates that groundwater levels in Nebraska since pre-development through 2015 declined about 11 inches on average. There are some areas of the state where declines are much more dramatic, but on average only 11 inches. By contrast, our most vocal critic, the state of Kansas, experienced declines of about 26 feet. Moreover, Kansas declines from 2013 to 2015 were 1.2 feet. So just in 2 years, the declines in Kansas were greater than in Nebraska from pre-development through 2015. And I think that is a testament to the management by DNR and by your NRDs. And I think it should give you some confidence that water will be available for future generations to use in Nebraska. I wouldn't say that if I were in Kansas. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Justin Levine.
Since Don gave a good background, I think, on the ownership of water in the state, I'm going to kind of veer off and give a little plug for my office. I am the Bureau Chief for the Ag Environment and Natural Resources Bureau at the Attorney General's office. There are currently 5 major bureaus in our office: civil, criminal, public protection, legal services, and the Ag Environment and Natural Resources. Basically what it sounds like. The civil section handles all civil litigation for the state of Nebraska. Criminal handles all criminal. Public protection deals with such matters as fraud and abuse of individuals in the state. And our legal services bureau basically handles all legal counsel for the state. I mean, they deal with contracts, rules and regulations, AGs opinions, public records requests, and the like. Our bureau is a little bit unique in that it's divided up by subject matter. Obviously, ag, environment, natural resources. And so our bureau, which consists right now of only 4 attorneys, handles all litigation and all legal counsel for the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Game and Parks Commission, the Department of Ag, all the commodity boards in the state, the Environmental Trust, and we handle basically everything for them. And so it's really a subject matter bureau, if you will. We're not out there dealing with all the civil litigation in the state, but only those areas that encompass ag and natural resources, which is very important in this state especially because a lot of the issues between those agencies overlap. Obviously issues with the Department of Ag DEQ, Game and Parks. Water is a big one. Water affects everything, whether it's endangered species with regard to the Game and Parks Commission, water quantity with the Department of Natural Resources, DEQ, water quality. The intersection between all those agencies and what they actually regulate with regard to water is very important. And so have that kind of knowledge and understanding at one shop in our office is very advantageous for us. And so with that, I'll pass it down.
Lyndon.
Well, I'll just give you a little bit of history and structure of the NRDs real quick. The NRDs are actually celebrating their 45th anniversary this year. We became effective July 1st of 1972, so the NRD system is a fairly young system compared to the state, which is also celebrating a birthday this year. We were created by the legislature, so we're a political subdivision of the state of Nebraska, but we are run by a locally elected board, so we are kind of the epitome of local government. All of our board members come from within the boundaries of the district, and as an employee or as a manager, we have monthly board meetings, and I take my direction from my board of directors on how we're going to move forward. The legislature did give the NRDs fairly broad responsibilities. There's 12 main responsibilities that they gave us that all can be kind of categorized under water quality, water quantity, soil erosion, wildlife habitat, and recreation. Kind of take all 12 of them in, to be quite honest with you. We do have taxing authority. On general, the NRDs take in about 1.5% to 2% of the total taxes in each county. And I don't want you to think that that's our main source of income. We always say our main base is taxes, and it is. But the Central Platte NRD, where I'm from in Grand Island, our tax ask is about $5.6 million annually, and we have about a $22 million budget. So we're using them tax dollars to parlay into more dollars, federal dollars, local grants, federal grants, partnering with NRCS. We have a major flood control project that we're doing right now that the state of Nebraska is paying a share, the Central Platte NRD, Hall County, the city of Grand Island, and Merritt County, which is also seeing benefits from that flood control project. So most of the NRDs do a very good job I should say all the NRDs actually do a very good job of taking them local tax dollars and parlaying them into a lot of dollars to help us do projects that we could not do on our own. We're also, I got to use my cheat sheet here, I wrote on the way up here. And I think one thing that the NRDs do that most people don't realize is we are leaving a legacy for the next generation as we move forward too. A lot of the projects we do are large projects. We're doing dams, flood control projects, terraces, tree plantings, things that are going to be in place for a long time that protect a lot of people. And towards that, building that legacy, I think we do a pretty good job of educating the youth that are going to be replacing people like me in another 10 or 15 years and helping Nebraska move forward and protecting their natural resources for future generations. I agree with Don. I think we're in a pretty unique position, and if we keep managing our water and our resources the way we do, I think the future looks pretty bright.
Thank you very much. Okay, so before we start our conversation, I wanted to introduce Senator Lydia Brosh from Bancroft. Came in, so we're very glad to have you with us in that regard. I also want to introduce Mary Yeager, who is the Associate Director of Humanities Nebraska, based in Lincoln. She's here with us, and what you may find interesting is Humanities Nebraska is helping to bring, in the coming months, a Smithsonian Institute exhibition display to several museums across Nebraska on the topic of water. That I think you will find very interesting in that regard. So watch for more information about that in the months ahead. But now it's time for our conversation, and there's very few ground rules to this. If you have a question for any one of our three esteemed panelists, great. All I ask is that you simply stand up, give your name, and speak loud enough so everyone can hear your question. If instead of a question, you'd simply rather like to stand up and offer an opinion on something, that's perfectly fine too. Again, stand up, give us your name, and speak loudly enough for all of us to hear. And I'd encourage all three of our guests to weigh in with any additional comments that they might have or to respond to your questions. I've also told them that they can pose questions to all of you if they're curious about something and want to get feedback from the likes of people here throughout Northeast and North Central Nebraska. Really, the only final ground rule is we're having a conversation. We're not looking for long, lengthy speeches. So hopefully you can all keep that in mind. We'll be able to allow that many more people to have a chance to offer an opinion and things like that. And because Mike Sochek, who's the general manager of the Lower Elkhorn NRD, was very helpful in organizing all this in that regard, told him I'd let him ask the first question. So, Mike, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I guess this question will be for Don or Justin. We keep our boards dealing with a drought plan, and we have constituents showing up saying, it's my water, I can do what I want. Can you briefly talk about the preferences on the users of the water and what has more weight than the next user, especially with groundwater?
All right, I think I've been drafted. In times of shortage, if it's a surface water system, the individual with the oldest priority date from the permit issued by DNR gets their water first. Now that's not absolute. There is a preference system, and this is encapsulated in the Nebraska Constitution, which says that personal use is number 1, number 2 is ag use, and number 3 is industrial. So if you have a junior priority date and someone with a senior right is taking the water, you can take it from them provided you are higher in that preference category. But you have to pay that individual just compensation. So that's something that's very rarely utilized. With respect to groundwater, the rules are again a little bit different. Because again, you take that right subject to the rules and regulations adopted by your NRD. To the extent you are on equal footing with a competing user or a neighbor, again, that preference category holds true. You can take that water from your neighbor if you have a higher preference category. If you're both in the same category, then you have to share equally. And I think that's it in a nutshell. Justin, you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, with regard to groundwater, I mean, that's where you start at. The state owns the physical molecules of water, and so therefore the state is allowed to set rules and regulations and laws with regard to the use of that water. And so what Lyndon was talking about with regard to the legislation that was adopted 45 years ago is that they have entrusted the local political subdivisions, the NRDs, with the responsibility of protecting that groundwater use. And so with that power comes the ability to, you know, in some areas of the state, set allocations for the amount of water that can actually be pumped out of a well with regard to ag uses. With regard to industrial uses, they can even control that. But again, the legislature felt it was important to have that local control because obviously every area of the state is different. And so you have a situation where in the Republican River Basin, where because we have compact issues and other things like that, you know, they have to require allocation to be put in place so that they can actually limit the amount of consumptive use we have in the basin. In other parts of the state, you have water aplenty, and there's really no need for an allocation, but you will have other management issues that will occur, whether it be, you know, dams that need to be put in for flooding and things of that nature. But as between, you know, the individual and the water, you know, that's kind of the misnomer I think that some people believe is that they actually own the water. They do not. The state owns the water, and they have a right to use that water for a beneficial purpose. And we've entrusted, at least with regard to groundwater, the NRDs to regulate that.
Great. The gentleman over here had a question. Yes?
I just, Mark gets from Norfolk. I just wanted to give appreciation. This is the first program I've been to at Paul Market, and he's missed it. You would have enjoyed this
J. Paul would have been a regular attendee at these, yes, things like that. Okay, so who has a question or a comment that they'd like to raise? Don't be shy.
Can't I'll ask a question?
Mark, go ahead.
Mark Hall, I'm from the Lower Corner Natural Resource District. In Iowa, there's a recent case, went to the state Supreme Court, where they're trying to adjudicate an issue where surface water was going downstream that was contaminated, and cities below that area contended that that shouldn't happen, and there should be something done about that. And I was curious, what do you think will happen with that particular case, and how that might apply to Nebraska and the constituents here?
I think you're talking about, well, I can't remember the case name, but this was dealing with nitrates.
Correct.
And I believe that case was just recently ruled on, where they actually ruled that there was no authority to regulate those land uses that were applying the nitrates, so the cities did not have a cause of action necessarily. That was kind of a case of first impression. I think you'll probably see more of that in the future, although that one was not successful, where the cities were basically attempting to regulate what could be put on individual farmers' land. You know, actually, that's a good thing that we have in the state of Nebraska here. I don't know if we would, well, we do have issues, and I'll maybe let Lyndon talk about that, but I mean, that's something that the NRDs deal with on the water quality side. I mean, a lot of people think that it's only quantity, that you're either talking about too much water or too little water, and you've got to regulate to deal with that. But a lot of the nitrate and quality issues in the state are on the ground with the NRDs, supported by actions of the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality. And so again, that's always an issue that's going to be out there, quite frankly. I mean, the more nitrates that you're applying to the field, when that leaches out, gets into waters of the U.S., quite frankly, what they're trying to say is that each individual field would be a point source. And so they're trying to regulate that application as a point source of contamination. I think it's an issue that's going to continue to be out there until things kind of get cleaned up a little bit. But maybe I'll let Lyndon just kind of talk about that.
I believe in Iowa too that slightly over 50% of all of their agriculture or cropped fields are tiled. So because of their high water level and the amount of rainfall they get leaching their nitrates into their groundwater, and that tile is bringing that groundwater to a surface water source that then the cities are pulling their water out of. So Iowa's in a much different situation than we are because of the amount of rainfall, and they don't very little irrigated acres in Iowa actually. So that's kind of the background of that lawsuit too, is the fact that they were pointing to that point source because it was the tile coming from under them fields that were dumping into the streams that the cities were getting their water out of. And I'll use my own NRD for an example. I mean, we've had a very active groundwater quality program since about 1982 or 3. Our average nitrates in our district at that time were about 19.5, just under 20 parts per million. We require producers in our phase 2 and 3 areas in our district to fill out a crop report form every year, and we actually just got it last year, so it's online. We used to get 6,000 of them in paper forms every year that we entered all that information into the computer and shared it with the university for studies to help us address them issues. But through education and through some of our requirements, we're seeing our nitrate levels come down to about 1/4 of a part per million per year in our district. We get a real wet year, we don't see that happen, of course, because we get leaching below the root zone in our real wet years. Or even if we see a hailstorm in a real large, maybe 30,000, 40,000 acre hailstorm come through, we'll see the nitrate level in small areas even come up if it's early in the season. So it's a long road moving forward, but the NRDs have the authority to address them issues, and I think there is some success stories out there. It's just a slow process.
Senator Brosh, you had a question.
I do, and I apologize to back up just a little. When we talk about the state of Nebraska owning the molecules of water, when did that happen? John Langno knows that. I spoke with Don Adams Jr., the former director of Nebraska's first, the groundwater group, and he believes the state does not own the water, but our Constitution merely says we share the water when there is a water shortage. The hierarchy is people, agriculture, then manufacturing. But as far as the state owning the molecules, I rarely get to tell him he's wrong, so.
I think you can tell him he's wrong.
Tell him he's wrong.
And that goes back to when Nebraska became a state. All of those natural resources belonged to the state, and the Nebraska Supreme Court has ruled on that very issue any number of times, and they've been quite adamant that the state owns the molecules itself. And again, what you get as a water user is what's called a usufruct right, and that's a right to use water under certain qualified conditions. And that's an actual property right, which is compensable if it's ever taken from you. But the molecules themselves, I don't think there's any serious debate about the state owning it.
Very good. Thank you.
One more questions. Yes, sir.
I'm Gene Emmett. Is water classified as mineral?
The question was whether water is classified as a mineral. In Nebraska, it is not. So in some states like Texas, you can actually use it like a mineral. It's the right of capture and you own it. In Nebraska, that is not the case.
Yeah, you have no, unlike a mineral right where you can actually divide the mineral right from the land, so you can sell off a certain mineral underneath your property to a company, they can come in and take it out. That's a separate property interest that you have in the land itself. That's not something you can do with water. You cannot separate a water right from the land itself. At least with regard to groundwater, it's appertinent to the land that you can use it for a beneficial purpose. So, you know, your right is the ability to use that water, but if you ever sell the land, you no longer have access to the water. It's truly with regard to the ownership of the land.
He got the water when he owned the ground.
Yes.
So I got water.
You have the right to use it if you own the land. Yeah. But again, it's a qualified right.
Gentleman in the red hat, yes.
Stephen Rosenthal, Nebraska. My question is generally following his lead. A lot of us in this room are landowners, and when we bought property, the water rights, the mineral rights, and everything was transferred with the property. So I don't understand why the state can say that they own the molecules of water that's underneath our property. We own everything above the property, everything below the property. It's right there in the deeds. Now, maybe I misinterpret this somewhere, but how can the state take something away from you that you bought and purchased 30, 40 years ago without compensation? I mean, if the state owns the water and the mineral rights, then everyone in this room should get a portion of the gravel that's mined out, or a portion of the oil, or a portion of the water. But I don't understand, when we bought the property, mineral rights and water rights are listed right on that deed as you owning them. So, you know, can you explain to me how we lost that?
I'll try. And first off, you probably, unless you've sold off those mineral rights, the mineral rights are in fact yours. So if there's gravel underneath, if there's oil, that is yours. Water, no matter what that deed said, you never did have that right. Those molecules were always owned by the state. And you go back to early cases in the 1930s by the Nebraska Supreme Court that state that. And I don't think there's any legal dispute about that. No matter what a deed says, it cannot do what the law didn't allow.
And in large part, I mean, it's water is a public want, meaning we need it to live. And so when the state of Nebraska became a sovereign state, they took ownership of the natural resources in the state, subject then to individuals going out and homesteading and purchasing the property. I think what Don's trying to say is, when you buy that piece of property again, the ownership of the molecules is not what you have an ownership interest in. When you purchase that land, you have an ownership in the right to use that cannot be taken away from you. And so you have a right to use all the water you want for a beneficial purpose on that land. You cannot waste it. You can't just, stick a well in and start pumping it down a ditch just because you like a wet ditch. That's waste. It has to be used for a beneficial purpose. And again, because water is a natural want, you get into situations then through the legislature over the years where they adopted the Natural Resources District to regulate the groundwater, and the Department of Natural Resources, which is a state agency that regulates surface water in the state. And so again, there's some different legal doctrines of how you own that water, quote unquote. With surface water, you get a piece of paper that says, I have a right to use, right? And you're put into a line, into a priority list. And so if the river goes down and you're a senior right, you can place a call into the Department of Natural Resources. They'll go in and shut everybody else off upstream of you so you can get your water. Where groundwater is correlative rights, share and share alike. And so if there was a massive problem where everybody was draining down the aquifer, it'd be inherent upon the NRDs to go out there and say, hey, we got a problem here, and we need to start putting regulations on the ability to withdraw that groundwater to protect the aquifer itself. Again, it's not the ownership of the molecules, but it is your legal right to use if you own that land. And so that's why you can use it for domestic purposes, you can pump it for ag purposes, for industry. But again, it's similar to domestic use if people want to look at it this way. I mean, when you're paying your water bill, you're not paying for the actual molecules of water. What you're paying for is the service of the water to your house or farm, right? They may base it on 8 gallons, per minute sort of scenario, but there's no ownership of the water. It's a service they provide. And so that's what I think we're trying to hit on, is that there is a distinction, but you do have a legal right to use that water if you own the property, subject to the regulation of the state and the NRDs.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Continue with that there. So the NRDs, I know were formed back in 1972 and everything, and you're saying that the legislature actually gave the NRDs the power to make these laws that they have made, like in 2012 with the drought?
Yes.
Our state legislature actually passed a bill that allows them to tell us we can't drill any more wells or where we can or cannot.
Yeah, they passed a number of bills, but most recently was 2004 with the passage of LB 962, which is really a revolutionary piece of legislation. And I'm not sure everybody appreciated the scope of that legislation, but it expressly created this regulatory structure and gave that authority to the NRDs.
And even prior to that, we had the passage of the Groundwater Management Protection Act that gave that authority to the NRDs as well. 962 kind of took it one step further, actually, the recent bill.
And the statute, to the extent you're interested, is section 46-739 identifies the particular controls that NRDs can adopt.
Can you say that?
Sure, 46-739. And that's a part of the legislation that Lyndon mentioned, the Groundwater Management Protection Act.
So Lyndon, let me follow up a little bit on that. The Daily News, we cover the Lower Elkhorn NRD. We go to their board meetings and their committee of the whole meetings. And I feel for the board members at times when they are dealing with drought mitigation plans and especially flow meters and things like that. Can you give us a sense from an NRD perspective across the state, just how we came to this kind of a situation, why in many cases NRDs feel they are necessary to protect against drought situations?
Sure. I think it's the NRD, it's incumbent upon the NRD board to lead by local control. I think all of Nebraska wants to see locally elected officials making local decisions, and that's what our local NRD boards are. I can guarantee you they're not there for the pay. It's a pretty thankless job, but it is, if you're going to run for an office like that, it is your responsibility to be sure that you're addressing the responsibilities that the legislature gave that entity to address our natural resources. And I think most of the boards in the state have been through these types of issues. Almost every NRD at one time or another has had either groundwater declines or quality issues or you name it, flood control even, that have been very controversial. But I think it's incumbent of them to look upon the bigger picture and then the bigger need for the entire district. And while looking at that, we're also looking at the economy and trying to grow what we have today. And so I think our locally elected boards are doing a very good job of addressing local needs and local issues. And if they're not willing to do that, then decisions will be made for them elsewhere, and they won't be local decisions.
Before I interjected my question, I saw, yes.
Jim David's Orchard, I live in Knox County and out of the NRD district up in Butte. Is there does the state dictate the rules and laws to the NRDs, or does each individual NRD have that authority to decide what to do and what not to do? No, I just want to.
The state dictates statutes to us, and we can use statutes to write our rules and regs as long as we stay within them statutes. So each NRD's rules could be different, yes.
Now, is there a moratorium for the whole state on irrigation wells, or is there not?
I do not believe there is, no.
Because we're supposed to have a moratorium on new irrigation wells, but the wells are being drilled because I was told before the moratorium was put on in our area, people knew it was coming and they went in and bought permits ahead of the schedule to drill wells. I have neighbors that they don't, that sold their land to people outside the area. People come in and develop range ground because of the high price of the corn.
Sure.
And we do not have an abundant amount of water in that area. And for quarter and 1.5 pivots, they drilled 5 wells. And then that didn't work, so they sold it to another individual who drills 9 wells. And then he even adds another 80 acres. Now, how can that be a very good regulation? And of course, as a neighbor, I was worried about my stock well. And they said, well, your stock well comes first. And they drilled the wells right across the road, right outside of their ownership area. So to be sure that they're pulling enough outside water from outside their land ownership. And I questioned, well, they couldn't make it on 5 wells, now you allow them 4 more wells. Where's the efficiency there, and who's regulating?
Well, like I said, every NRD has different rules and different regulations. It sounds to me like, and I'm not speaking for that NRD, I would suggest you go visit with them.
Well, I thought there was a moratorium for the whole state, that's why I couldn't understand what was going on.
I'm positive there's not a moratorium statewide. It is up to each NRD if there needs to be a moratorium or not. And we do have some areas of the state that probably has no reason to have a moratorium on, to be quite honest with you. And we have some areas that have probably had moratoriums for 10, 12 years already.
Don, did you want to add anything?
Well, I was just going to say that really what the legislature did was they gave the NRDs a menu of options that they could select from and use. So each NRD could select from that menu and decide what achieves their own individual goals and objectives. And as Lyndon said, I think you probably need to talk to your NRD to figure out what the circumstances were behind granting those permits to drill those particular wells.
And then, last question, surface water. Does the NRD control the surface water and allow permits for dams? One of my biggest complaints with happening in the state of Nebraska is we're letting all the surface water go down the river. We used to have, well, my grandfather and my dad in Cumming County put up a lot of dams, and we don't see that anymore. And they told, well, you can't put dams up in here.
The NRD does not permit dams. The state, the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, permits dams. There's actually, I believe there's not a permit required if it's under 15 acre feet and 25 feet high on the downhill side, on the back side of the dam. I don't even believe there's a permit required for that smaller size structures. If it is over that, you do have to have a permit from the state of Nebraska. The NRDs have no authority over the dams, over the surface water aspect of that.
Well, I heard one of the gentlemen say that on surface water, you have to have a permit to pump. Okay,
That's
if
correct.
I put a dam in, the guy that's got the permit to pump and I'm a tributary, can he come in and say, whoop, you cannot dam my water?
I don't know that he can say you cannot dam his water up, but you can't hold his water back. You would have to release any inflows during his time of need. So you could store, let's say he has an irrigation right, in the non-irrigation season, you could store your inflows coming into your structure. But during the irrigation season, when he has a call on for water, a need for that water, your dam would be junior to him. You'd have to have a way to release the inflows coming in so he could irrigate with that water. He would be senior to you.
So you were saying I have to turn my dam apart to let that water?
Absolutely not. You would have to build your dam with a valve or a structure of some type that you could release water out of it. And there's a lot of dams in Nebraska built that way.
I thought I saw a question hand raised over here. Senator.
I want to hear more from this group, but I do have one more question, is when we talk about the history of the NRDs, at that point, and the same with the legislature, there were more rural senators in the legislature. As our population has shifted and our rural communities are getting smaller, they get less representation in the legislature. Now the NRDs, you know, I also have the Papio, Missouri NRD in my district as well, where 5 counties, 3 rural, you have Douglas, Sarpy, Bird, Thurston, and then it goes to Dakota. They only have 1 representative, and the entire board is from urban areas. And I was vice chair of natural resources. I heard from others saying that we needed more members at large because the same thing is happening in rural areas where fewer farmers are represented on the board and more are urban. What are your thoughts? Because the board's control, it doesn't have to be the legislature. They could vote to go, to reconfigure themselves.
That is exactly right. The NRD boards have the ability to decide how many board members are going to be on their board. I believe that the 5 is a minimum and 21 is the maximum that they can have. Currently, I believe the law says that their sub-areas cannot be over a 3-to-1 population. So for the NRDs, one sub-district can't be over 3 times larger than another. We have been encouraged over the years to try to get them as close to 1-to-1 as possible. So.
But is it actually happening? That's my concern.
The 1-to-1?
That they're restructuring themselves to have a balance of more rural, or because in the hierarchy, I guess, of the water use.
I wouldn't say that they're restructuring themselves. I think within the law they have to be within the 3-to-1 population for their sub-areas, or they can elect at large. They actually could elect all of their directors at large, but I'm not sure that would...
They choose to do that.
Well, I'm not sure that would address your issue as well, because my district runs from Columbus to Gothenburg along the Platte River. I have about 130,000 residents within our district, and 30,000 of them are rural. So if we elected 100% of ours at large, chances are we would maybe have 2 or 3 farmers on our board of 21. And right now I probably have 14 or 15 out of 21 that are rural. So I'm not sure how to, I understand your concern, but I'm not exactly sure how to address that under our current regulations.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Greg Lambert, you addressed the gentleman's situation in the dam, and I interpreted that to be like from a flowing stream that had a constant. What if a person was put in a dam that was on an intermittent waterway and only caught water in excessive rainfall times? Could a person use that water as he wanted?
The same rules apply as if it were a running stream. Because if that water drains into a running stream, it's counted as part of that stream flow. And I think DNR has been pretty aggressive about enforcing those.
I think to finish his question, because he ended it by saying, could you use that however you wanted? So if you get a permit from, if you have a right to store water in that dam, you don't have a right to use water out of that dam. So just because you store it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want with it.
It actually
just wanted
requires two rights, storage right and a storage use right.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
My name is Greg Young, and I farm southwest of Plainview. I have 2 quarters in the lower NRD district. And you guys say that the water is owned by the state. So when we are required to put flow meters on our pivots, and this is what I was told last fall in 2016, that flow meter was to my benefit so that I know how much water I'm putting on each year. But if the state owns the water, why do I have to go and put a flow meter on to meter the water? The NRDs or the state should go and pay to put the flow meters on, because the NRD is the one that wants to know how much water we're putting on. The other question is, there was a cost share to put flow meters on, and in that cost share, I am supposed to get soil probes to put on. So this spring, before planting season, I come down to the NRD or to the office here at the Lifelong Learning Center to get those. They were out of them. I have made 2 phone calls since then this summer to get those flow meters, and I have yet to get a phone call back to the soil probes. I have yet to get a phone call back saying they have the soil probes to put on. And that's supposed to be a cost share. The flow meters cost me $4,000 to put on, and they're supposed to be a cost share, but I don't get that money back until the 3-year program is up. So I have not received the soil probes to put on my fields. So now they're going to move it to next year because the season's basically over for watering. I've got to pay for that and somehow pay for those flow meters and the soil probes and not get any money back for 3 years. Now it's going to be another year after that. I guess my question is, why should the farmer pay for something that the state owns? And we're supposed to keep track of all that. I questioned that last fall because I went and asked them, why do I have to put a flow meter on it? What does that benefit me? I have a chart with my sprinkler package that tells me what percentage I'm putting on, and I do keep track of that. I have done that since I started farming. I know how much I'm putting on. The state, all that flow meter is for the state to know how much we're putting on, so that if we have a drought, then they can start restricting us. And I guess I don't understand why we have to pay for any of that. If the state owns the water, then the state should own the flow meters and come out and read it in the springtime, read it in the fall.
We'll let our guests here address it, but I know there's other NRD representatives in the audience. If they want to chime in, that'd be fine too. Who wants to start?
Well, I was just going to say, I've heard that concern expressed a lot in the last couple of decades. You know, flow meters went on some NRDs some decades ago. And I think there's a reasonable case that can be made for that the governmental unit that's doing the regulation should pick up that tab. But I think for your individual case, I don't know if you've expressed those concerns to your NRD board, but that's the place to do it, to let them know what your concerns are.
I expressed when I came down to apply for the cost share on the flow meters, and that was the excuse that I got, was so that I know how much water I'm putting on. Like I said, I already know how much I'm putting on.
Well,
I have a sprinkler package and a percentage of what I'm putting on, when I set the percentage, it tells me what moisture, how much water I'm putting on. I already know that.
I can't address that. That's between you and your
And I have
NRD
tried
board.
to address that by calling down twice to try and get the soil probes, and I get to get a phone call back saying that they have it, so I can come get it. So, in my opinion, I don't think the NRD is doing their job. I did my part.
I would suggest you talk to your local NRD manager.
It don't do any good. I've made 2 phone calls to try and get them. I guess, that's why I'm coming to you guys. I mean, maybe you can do something to get the NRD to help me.
Well, I believe they're here tonight, and hopefully one of them visits with you before you
That'd be a
leave.
great thing to do. because
All righty.
I visited the office 3 times total this summer. And the office over at Neal's one time, because I have flow meters on that side too. And I have yet to get any results, so.
I'm guessing they will visit with you before you leave tonight.
Other comments, questions? I have a curious for our two state senators, any inkling of water-related legislation that may be coming up in future sessions of the unicameral that you're aware of? Senator Albright.
Well, I serve on the Natural Resources and Ag Committee, but not that I know of, but I do know that I hear concerns in District 17. We have 2 different NRDs represented in District 17. One half is metered, the other is not. And there's no rhyme or reason to a constituent, why do I have to do it, but the guy across the street doesn't have to? So a question that I would have for you is, who determines what projects go on? Is it your board? Is it your staff and yourself? Is it constituents that come in with issues? How do you determine it?
Normally when we're making decisions on boundaries, is kind of what you're talking about. Our board ultimately makes them decisions, but normally we're working with private consultants or possibly even the Bureau of Reclamation or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or whoever. We're working with them to try to get the best geology we can, the best information we can, because you have to draw a line somewhere. You have to put a boundary somewhere. If you're talking about quality, or if you're talking about groundwater declines, you can't just say our entire district is going to be metered and go to allocation because we have 50,000 acres with declines over here. So boundaries are never easy to draw, and people are always unhappy about where you draw a boundary.
And when you ask the question, do you have anything coming up? I'm quite certain there's always somebody working on something. But more importantly, we also hear of duplication of services. When you say that you work with the DEQs or you work with the Natural Resources Department or Game and Parks, these are our tax dollars. So a lot of people ask, why are you putting in, trails? Why wouldn't Game and Parks do that? Are you really water quality or is DEQ water quality? So as a freshman senator, I'm trying to wrap my head around all this too, because, we farm as well, and it's important, the water's a commodity, there's no doubt about it, and we have to be very resourceful on what we use it for and that sort of thing, but I think that the concerns about just whose water isn't always just a concern, it's much greater than that, but I appreciate all the comments here tonight, and it helps me to understand that there's something I need to do. So, again, the meters, the duplication of services, and who decides what projects go forward are my 3 questions.
Sure. Our board decides which projects go forward. The staff may make recommendations to them based on studies or based on the information that they gather, but then ultimately the boards make their decisions. Your other question was...
The metering, some do, some don't.
Sure, and in Nebraska, to me the metering is a very easy answer in Nebraska, to be quite honest with you. In western Nebraska, we're in the rainfall shadow of the Rocky Mountains, and we get 14, 15 inches of rain. In southeast Nebraska, we get 36 inches of rain. So just because Box Butte County has to meter and go to allocation because of groundwater concerns doesn't mean Lincoln County should, or Dawson County, or Nemaha, you know what I mean? And I think that's the beauty of the NRDs, to be quite honest with you, is because of the watershed boundaries that we have, we can address that across the state, rather than DEQ or the Department of Natural Resources say, oh, we're in Nebraska, we're going to be metered and we're going to be allocated. That makes no sense. It makes no sense to put on unneeded regulation. But there are areas in the state that need regulation. And that local control helps that. Sorry, you had a third.
Lyndon, what about the duplication?
Yes.
What determines the scope of an NRD's
Sure.
area of expertise?
And actually, the difference between DEQ and the NRDs when it comes to water quality is the NRDs address non-point source. So, and the state addresses point source. So feedlots are considered a point source. You can see where that pollution is, or a factory or something like that is a point source. You know exactly where it's coming from. The NRD is responsible for non-point source pollution. So nitrates in your water, you can't walk out to a point and say, this is the point that nitrates are entering the water. It's a broad scale. It's a broad scale issue, and that's really the difference. The division between the two is one is point source and one is non-point source management.
Additional questions?
Did you said both senators?
No.
I am term limited, I have one more year left, but you're not gonna term me now. I always tell my constituents,
Do you ever stand up and talk to them?
Can you hear me? All right. I hope and pray that the legislature does not have bills that control your water. I do believe that farmers, ranchers, they are stewards of the earth. And when somebody says, I'm the government here to help, you're in trouble. And I do have concerns about the metering, especially when you look at a region, northeast Nebraska, where the closer you get to the east and further into Iowa, that water, you're talking about the waterfall. My concern is that when the state starts to meter the water, which it's not the state, it's the NRDs, that's going to lead to taxing water. That's always been a concern, and I do believe the NRDs should be responsible. If they're going to mandate it, they should not ask farmers to pay for it. And I do, but as far as legislation, you won't see me introduce that, because I believe that we can be good neighbors, that we understand when the water is dry, you knock on your neighbor's door, you handle it in a civil way, but I hope the legislature, when I've seen them, and I've seen a lot of legislation, we've been through the flooding along the Missouri River where we had water for 6 months, then we had the drought, 2011, water is an act of God, Mother Nature, and I think when the legislature starts to get their hands into it, it's going to cost us something. So legislation, I hope not.
Good, thank you. Don, and I'd be curious from Don and Justin's perspective, can you imagine a scenario where we may be discussing taxing water?
I don't see that in the immediate future at all. I don't see any appetite for that. Where I get more concerned is the federalization of water management and how that could occur. You heard the Iowa situation, you saw the water contamination in Flint, Michigan. Every time something like that happens, you get someone in Congress who decides it's a federal issue. And I think there's a great risk for Washington to get involved in state water management issues. And I think that would be a tragedy.
Justin, any thoughts?
Well, I was just going to comment back on what Lynn was saying. I mean, I understand that nobody likes meters and nobody wants to have to put one on. But again, we have 23 natural resources districts in the state that are divided up in very distinct watersheds across the entire area that we encompass. Some areas of the state, like the Republican River Basin, you have compacts involved, and obviously, when you don't comply with an interstate compact, you get sued in front of the United States Supreme Court, and the next thing you know, the state has to pay money for that. The settlement that came out of that case even required those meters to be put in place so that you could actually read the consumption of what was being pulled out of the ground because it mattered with regard to an individual compact. That's the Republican River Basin. That's separate and distinct from the Upper Elkhorn or anywhere else on the eastern part of the state, right? They're just simply different requirements. And so, again, each natural resource district is going to make that decision on what is the best control and potential regulation that they need to impose to meet whatever either legal requirements and or obligations that they have, or just, problems with regard to hydrology of the basin, again, the level of the aquifer. I do think it's very important that we maintain that structure of the local control, because quite frankly, they're the individuals that know best what's going on in their area. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to live there, whether they're having water quality issues with regard to high nitrates, or they're over pumping an aquifer, and it's not going to be there for 2 or 3 generations from now. And so again, it's those individuals that actually live on the land. I mean, they're the ones that are regulating themselves, and again, it is those boards that have to make those tough decisions. You know, a lot of the metering that's being done in Republican, it's mandatory. We have to have it. In other NRDs, they are trying to gain information on what is actually coming out of the ground, so that if they do have problems in the future, they can understand what they need to do. Not go from 100 miles an hour down to 0, but be able to measure it down to 95 if they need to. And so I just think it's very, you can't look at one NRD and say the rules apply across the state, because they simply don't. The hydrology of our state is just completely different. Every river basin, whether it's the Niobrara, the Platte, the Republican, the Blue, each NRD has their own very specific issues which they have to deal with. Eastern part of the state, you're spending a lot of money on dams. In the western part of the state, you're spending a lot of money trying to ratchet back depletions to groundwater pumping. And that takes, you know, putting on allocations, that takes potential land management decisions that the NRDs can quite frankly put upon the constituents in that area to try to make sure that they're meeting their legal requirements, and or to protect the resource itself, which at the end of the day I think is what they're there for. And so I don't think we're ever going to tax water. I don't see that ever coming down either. You know, we do have to have, you know, support through some taxation to be able to do some of these projects that we're, you know, and quite frankly, a lot of this, the NRDs aren't out there looking for stuff to do. It's things forced upon them. It is a massive drought that occurs for 5 or 6 years. It is a compact that they have to comply with, because they are a part of the state, the political subdivision, that is responsible for the management of that resource. And so, again, you know, there's always going to be issues, and someone's going to maybe feel put upon, but it goes back to, I think, where Don started. I mean, the state does own this water. It is a natural want. We have to protect it. The legislature has basically said the way we're going to protect it is have the Department of Natural Resources at the state level deal with surface water across the state, and the NRDs, these 23 individual political subdivisions, are going to regulate that groundwater to protect it, make sure it's there, make sure it's clean. I guess I'll just throw it out there.
Respond? Okay.
Yes.
I'm also the chair of the Agriculture Committee, and we have a shrinking farm population and farms. We're down to 48,000 farms. Now the rules, the regs, it is getting harder and harder to farm, and I believe that farmers have a vested interest, many generations, to ensure that they have the next season, the next generation. And when you're talking about, well, we need an NRD to decide for us what is good, that's not local control. That's NRD control in some cases. You know, I see their value. I believe when they were first formed, there was a different balance between agriculture, people in town, rural, and manufacturing. But now I believe with shrinking representation, shrinking number of farms, I don't know how we get that balance back. But local, you talk to many of the people in my district, and they don't feel they're being adequately represented in their needs. That it's looking more and more like the DEQ, the EPA, the NR, you know, that we need more regulation. No, I think we need to empower people back to where they first started. And if you see a problem, you address the problem and not just everyone.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone want to respond? I know there's a gentleman in a green shirt that has a hand up.
My name is John Meyer. I farm in the lower NRD district. I would dispute your fact that they don't tax water. They don't tax me directly on the water that I pump through. And I farm some dry land, some irrigated. My irrigated land taxes are approximately double of what my non-irrigated land is. The land is identical. This side of the fence, irrigated. This side of the fence, not irrigated. They're not taxing. Soil types is a piece of it. Irrigation is a huge piece of it.
Is that reflected in the value of the land?
It is reflected in the value of the
And
land.
I think that's what your local tax assessor is basing their taxation on.
But so they're indirectly taxing the water because we're in Phillips moratorium. This side of the fence, I cannot put an irrigation well on. That land value of that land is held down, which is okay, but it also means like it's not as productive as the land that I own on the opposite side of the fence that has irrigation, that has almost doubled the taxes that are paid on that. But they're taxing to one.
But I think that's different than what Senator Brosh was indicating, where I think she was saying, are you getting taxed per gallon of water applied, or
That'll
something
probably
like
be
that.
2 years from now, when the moratorium, now the mandatory flow meters, now in 2018 or 2020, they came out and say, you're limited to 12 inches a year, you're limited to 10 inches a year. I'll be very interested to see if the tax base on my irrigated land is going to drop to match the tax base on my non-irrigated land, because the limits are being placed.
Coming from a district that put on a moratorium, I used to work for Upper Niobrara White in Shattern. And I know the manager and the assistant manager both in here tonight from that district. I can tell you that your taxes will not change unless your valuation changes based on that allocation. It will not change.
Oh, I know.
And
the productivity of the land.
it is, that's correct. And when you look in western Nebraska where you're getting 15, 16 inches of rain, your management style has changed drastically to continue to operate on 10, 11 inches of water. So we hear a lot about, okay, maybe we need a moratorium statewide and maybe we need an allocation statewide. Well, a 10-inch allocation from you isn't going to change your yield very damn much. It's going to, excuse my language, isn't going to change your yield very much. It really isn't. It's going to change your management style. You're going to want a meter because you're going to want to know exactly what you're pumping. But if you got 15 inches of rainfall and a 10-inch allocation, it's going to change your income drastically. And that's what we're seeing in western Nebraska.
Also, we're seeing that right now with the moratorium. The land that you cannot, it's not half, it's probably 2/3 of non-irrigated land with the moratorium effect.
Mike?
Well, since we haven't heard from any NRD board members, I guess I'll stick my neck out first. You guys want to say something. In relationship to Mr. Young, we're elected as your representatives, and if things aren't being done as you ask staff, contact us. I mean, that's what we're here for. I mean, you guys elected us to represent your interests, no different than congressmen and legislators and whomever. But at the end of the day, we're dealing, the reason I ran to be on the NRD is because I value what we do as farm. I farm. And, I want to make sure we have water here for my son, my grandson, whomever. I mean, in quality, in quantity both. But by the same token, we have to keep in mind economic development for the state. Without irrigation, what's Nebraska have? I mean, that's our claim to fame, basically. And the thing about it is, you've got to balance those issues. And in the lower Elkhorn, for instance, we're a little different than the upper Elkhorn because we have, confined aquifers as you travel further east. And we have situations a lot of people aren't aware of. When we're trying to get to the point where we're opening up irrigation. I believe that'll be done this fall, I hope. But it's like Lyndon said, there's places within the lower Elkhorn that water's not a problem. But then there's other places that, the drawdown, in-season drawdown becomes so drastic, it becomes a hindrance on, well owners, domestic, irrigated, whomever. So there's a lot of balance issues that we have to weigh as directors on the NRD that, you can't just lump them all up to one sum matter, So we're trying to do the best we can, but if you have issues, please call your representative. In your case, Greg, I think I'm your representative of Pierce County. So, didn't know anything about that, but if there's something we can do to help, that's what we're here for. So, I guess I just wanted to say that because, sometimes, but I really believe the NRDs do factor in our conversation because I would really hate to see the state try to control everything because of the different situations in each NRD like ours, and I'm sure yours, Lyndon, So I think they're very important, and I think we need to maintain those NRDs and what we do just for the value of the water. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. There, in the back, yes. Ron.
Yeah, I've got a question. Ron Schmidt from Madison. In 2012, we had a severe water situation here in the Lower Elkhorn. And then in this recent years, why it's not been so bad, you know, we were worried about it for a while this year. But what I was wondering is if we would have had, say 2013, 2014, would have been just like 2012. And I kept hearing about how Lincoln was, in 2012, was experiencing some water problems themselves because of the Platte River and stuff like that. My question is to what extent can Lincoln, if we'd have an extended drought, to what extent could Lincoln or someone like that have an effect on the Lower Elkhorn as far as us pumping, if the water level in the Platte River goes down, or the Elkhorn River, the Platte River goes down, to what extent can they take and have on us as far as irrigating and stuff like that? Do they have some far-reaching powers, or is there something to that? I understand that they can, but I wasn't sure.
That's a really good question. And maybe to provide a little context to that, the city of Lincoln has its well field essentially located right underneath the Platte River. And it's a relatively shallow well field, and it's designed to take advantage of the flows of the Platte River itself. I don't remember the year, but there was legislation that passed that allowed municipalities to get water rights for their well field. That effectively, even though they're pumping groundwater, it had a surface water component to it. And the city of Lincoln went ahead and got those rights and acquired priority dates for those wells. So in that very year, the city of Lincoln, I know from talking to their lawyer, came very close to calling for administration. And the way it works is they, under the surface water system, go all the way up the Platte and every tributary, including the Elkhorn River, that is above their well field. And if you have a junior water right, a junior surface water right, they can ask the state to shut you down. And they came very close to doing that in that particular year. Now, the city of Lincoln's well field is relatively junior, so most water users would have been probably unaffected by that. And if the city of Lincoln wanted more water than what their priority date would allow, they would have to go back to that preference category and go out and pay you for your loss of production if they wanted your well shut off. And that, I think, would have gotten enormously expensive for Lincoln. So I think they would have gone just so far as calling for the regulation, and then probably had some pretty significant conservation measures imposed on City of Lincoln users. And they did do some of that in advance of that, and fortunately averted that call. But I think, you know, if we get into a long-term drought, that's a possibility.
The question I would have then on that is, when it comes to water, does the industrial use in Lincoln, to what extent do they have more pull than the industrial use, if you want to call irrigation, water, and center pivot here in northeast Nebraska?
Yeah, that's another good question. Under those preference categories that I mentioned when I first started, ag is above industrial. So to the extent industries rely upon water, they would have to pay you just compensation if they wanted to grab your water right out of priority. But the preference category only kicks in if you want to jump ahead in line.
We have time for probably one or two more quick questions before we want to give our guests a chance to make some final comments. So way in the back there. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Glenn Irvin, I live here in Norfolk. I purchased my home back in 1990, and one of the things I can recall signing over when I signed a bunch of papers was I had to sign over the water and mineral rights to the city of Norfolk. Everybody else I've talked to, nobody ever remembers signing such paperwork, and I just wondered if that's normal, to having to sign that over to the city. And the other part of my question is, do we, I understand that if I did put a well in my yard in town, I would have to put a meter on it and pay the city for the water. Is that correct too?
Dealing with little city issues here.
Yeah, I've never heard of having to deed that over to the city when you acquired a home. That's news to me.
And as far, that's news to me too, and as far as if you would have to meter it and pay the city for your water, you would have to ask the city. I don't know that. I know that that's not true in every city in the state, that's for sure, but I have no idea about Norfolk.
Okay, is there anyone who hasn't asked? There you go, sir. Yeah.
Scott Olson, Decatur, Nebraska. There was a plan for a while for the NRD to ship some of our aquifer water out of state. Is there anything to that? I know the boys in Omaha were working very hard on that, and they were really upset when they tried to pass a bond issue and it did not go through. But they had plans to ship some of our aquifer water to California or other states or whatever. There's a lot of talk about that going around, just asking.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's one of those urban legends.
You know?
If you'll recall, that wasn't me. If you'll recall some years ago, this is probably 15 years ago now, there was some talk, there was a developer from Denver who talked about putting in a well field in the Sandhills and filling up tankers on a train and shipping that to Denver. And the legislature immediately passed legislation that largely prohibited that from happening. So, and I've not heard any rumors of that. And I suppose the risk is always there, particularly when Colorado's talking about spending $20 billion in infrastructure for water projects in the next 20 years. Nebraska water probably looks pretty cheap to them in that respect, but
It's huge, the NRDs are already doing that down by North Platte. They're pumping water out of an irrigation well, running down the creek and it's pulling the canvas.
that's not what that project is.
Shipping our water out of state.
Stephen.
That's not what it is. That offsets Nebraska's consumptive uses to keep Nebraska in compliance with the compact. It's not a commercial use or anything like that. It's simply, as soon as it hits the stream, it offsets Nebraska's consumptive use into the compact accounting.
So different situation.
Yeah, very different.
Stephen, last question.
Yeah, I had a question. You mentioned there's 23 NRDs across the state. Is there any formal meetings that NRDs have between each other in terms of sharing best practices and having those types of discussions?
We do. I don't know that they're necessarily formal. We do have basin meetings a couple of times a year for all the NRDs in that basin to kind of visit about our projects, our studies, our concerns. So there is some meetings like that. They're normally not attended by our entire board. A lot of times maybe 2 or 3 NRDs will get together in the basin. The executive committees will meet. So it's not so you don't have 60 people in a meeting trying to have a discussion. But yes, they do.
You have the Nebraska Association of Resources Districts, do you not?
We do. We have a trade association, the Nebraska Association of Resource Districts. We have an office in Lincoln that actually helps us organize the meetings and schedule them as well. So that's correct.
Great.
Are they open to the public? Are they open to the public?
Any meeting that we have a quorum of our board at is open to the public. They are public meetings.
Thank you.
And we fall under the State Open Meetings Act.
That's correct, and the meetings would be advertised. Yes.
Exactly. Before we wrap up, we're getting close to 7 o'clock. I want to give all 3 of our gentlemen a chance to make some final comments based on what they've heard today, some of your questions, comments, and things like that. Just a chance to offer some final thoughts. So, Don?
Well, I'll leave you with a scary scenario. This is a case that must be me. This is a case that I've been involved in for some time now, and I represent the city of Memphis, Tennessee, in a case against the state of Mississippi, where Mississippi sued Memphis, Tennessee because its municipal groundwater wells are taking water and drawing it across the state line from Mississippi. Mississippi, like Nebraska, says we own those molecules of water. In Memphis, because you've been using our water for so long, you owe us $600 million. Every state with an interstate aquifer would be looking at potential liability if this case has any traction. We're optimistic it will ultimately be dismissed, but with every court, you just never know. So that's a case to keep your eye on.
Thank you. Justin?
Yeah, I'll be a doomsayer too, a little bit, but it's more of a cautionary note for those that maybe haven't had to go through the issues that I've kind of witnessed, and obviously the NRD managers and board members here. You know, I've gone through with regard to the Upper Platte Basin and the Republican Basin. And that is a large reason why LD 962 was adopted back in 2004 was in part because of the upper, or the Platte River to the west and obviously the Republican River. And both those cases basically have a situation where we were not quite on the ball with looking at our natural resources and regulating them to stay in compliance either with a compact or an interstate agreement. And so what you have now is, in the Republican, you have a lot of fighting over that scarce water resource. Kansas originally filed their lawsuit in the United States Supreme Court in 1998. It was then settled in 2003. Within 3 years, the state of Nebraska violated that compact, and we were back in court. And we were in court until a final decision came out in 2015. In the midst of that, when we were trying to regulate individuals to comply with that compact, 5 cases were filed against either the NRDs or the Department of Natural Resources with regard to their regulation and administration of that water. 2 of those cases are still going on and will not be completed until next year. That's 20 years of litigation in a basin, $5.5 million in damages paid. That's not where you want to be if you're a board member. You want to be on top of these things. You want to be looking at how to resolve the issues ahead of time instead of getting into a position where you've got to back up the train, because it's a lot more painful to go that way. Now, it does keep attorneys like me in the AG's office employed. So I've been there for about 13 years. So.
But I'll add that I had a full head of hair when that all started.
Well, Lyndon, are you going to join in on those cheery notes, or are you going to have something?
You know, I'm not an attorney. So, I went in on a positive note. I said earlier tonight that the NRDs aren't out looking for regulations for our producers. And we're really not. It's the last thing. I guarantee you as staff, it's the last thing we want to do. It makes our life very hard. It makes our jobs very difficult. We're a taxing entity, and we are governed by the legislature to do a job. And I think our boards do a very good job of deciding what's important in our districts and what needs to be done. We're not looking for regulation. We are doing everything in our power first to try to avoid regulation. It's really the last thing we're looking at doing. And with that said, to end, Nebraska is the only state that has NRDs. But I know Dean Etzen, our executive director, is sitting in here tonight, and I don't know how many states he's spoken to within the last 2 years that want to start NRDs in their state. They envy Nebraska. They envy our NRD system and our local government and our local control of our natural resources. I still don't know where Dean is, but have you spoken to 5 or 6 states in the last 2 years, Dean?
Dean left.
You've spoken to 6 states.
I would have too if I could have. But anyway, I know he's spoken to a number of states. I have spoken to 2 different states myself, and I believe South Dakota actually introduced legislation this year very similar to Nebraska's NRDs, and California is in the process of divvying up their state into multiple entities to address natural resource and groundwater management. And all of the states that are looking at that are looking to Nebraska's leadership on what works and what doesn't when it comes to natural resource management. So I think we have a great thing going, and I think we have a very bright future in Nebraska. We just need to manage what we have, and I think we're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon. Now, as we close out today's program, let's first and foremost give all 3 of our gentlemen very much appreciate their spending the time and sharing their expertise with us. Let's also, if you would, give Northeast Community College and Calmwater Financial Group a round of applause for helping us sponsor. As I mentioned at the beginning, this was our 7th such community conversation we've had over the last couple of years, and we want to do more of them, whether they be on local issues, statewide, national, and we really would like to hear from all of you as to what topics we should undertake. So if you have any ideas on things you'd like to have a community conversation on, please don't hesitate to contact me at the Daily News, or the folks at Northeast Community College, or Chuck Olson and Dave Amick at Calm Water Financial, we'd be happy to try and put something together so that we can help further our awareness and our knowledge of important issues that affect all of us in that regard. So, thank you all for coming, very much appreciate it. Have a good evening.